In 1995, the biggest cruise line in the entire world, Royal Caribbean, had a problem. Their sales were steady, they were constantly producing new cruise ships, but they were having trouble attracting the new-to-cruise market which they needed to fill those ships. Over half the people who took a cruise were repeat cruisers, and as only 4% of the US had taken a cruise in 1995, Royal Caribbean needed to do something drastic. They didn't know at the time just how difficult this would be. They went massively over budget on this project, the ship caught fire, and this was before the ship had even set sail. The answer to their problems would come from an unlikely place. This is the Cilia Symphony. She's a ferry, and I just disembarked a cruise on her where I learned all about how she inspired the last couple of decades of cruise ships. Richard Fain was chairman of Royal Caribbean at the time, and he desperately wanted to get rid of some of the outdated ideas about cruising, like how they're boring, like how they're for old people. They didn't know what they needed to do to get rid of that, but they knew that they didn't want to just build more of the same, so they decided to build the biggest cruise ship in the world. Richard had seen the Cilia Symphony and he knew that he wanted to do something like this. He wanted to take this idea and make it bigger and better and put it on Royal Caribbean's cruise ships. They nicknamed the project Project Eagle, and they set out to create something kind of like this. They had a budget of $500 million and they went over that quite considerably. Richard hired a man from Finland called Harry, who'd previously worked on the Cilia Symphony when they created this ferry. He was a very successful naval architect, and Royal Caribbean knew that if they had any chance of this plan working, they needed Harry on their team. Harry definitely became the go-to big cruise ship man, and he went on to design 10 ships that at the time of launch were the biggest ships in the world. The central promenade on the Cilia Symphony is 120 metres long, and there are 4 decks of cabins that look down into this central street. I stayed in one of these cabins during my time on the ship, and I spent a lot of time in this window looking down on other guests. It was a great place for people watching. They even had live music in here, and I had a front row seat from my window. On the bottom level, there were shops and there were restaurants. They even do acrobatic shows here sometimes. This really is the heart of the ship. It wasn't just a case of taking a cruise ship design that they already had and knocking out a few walls to create this space in the middle. They needed to create a ship that would handle well, especially in bad weather, considering the fact that it had this big space in the middle, and it still needed to be comfortable for the guests. Something like this had never been done on a cruise ship before, so it was a huge, huge risk. They decided to go with a shipyard in Finland where they had previously had 2 cruise ships lengthened, the Nordic Prince and the Song of Norway. When a shipyard lengthens a ship, they literally cut it in half and add a new section in the middle. So as Royal Caribbean trusted this shipyard to do that to their ships, they also trusted them to build them a new one. This shipyard was also where the Cilia Symphony was built, so they were used to handling projects like this. Royal Caribbean had to go back to the drawing board with absolutely everything. Even the hull was redesigned and retested. The ship that they designed, which would go on to be called Voyager of the Seas, wasn't meant to be as big as she was, but they added things like an ice skating rink, which was also a cruise ship first, and that really increased the gross tonnage. She ended up being 138,000 gross tons, which was 76% bigger than Royal Caribbean's last cruise ship. Now the biggest ship in the world is 236,000 gross tons, but for 1995, 138,000 was unheard of. Unfortunately, the ship did encounter a bit of a problem, and in 1991, someone cocked something up and the ship did catch on fire. The fire started in a storage area at the back of the ship, and it took over 3 hours for the fire to be put out. To fix the damage, they needed to replace 100 tons of steel. This was the biggest cruise ship in the world. Everybody was looking at it, so they didn't want it to go over schedule. They hired 300 extra people to make sure that they could stay on track and release when they said that they would release this ship. Your Britishism of the week is cock up. I know cock up sounds very rude, but it's really not here. If you cock something up, you just make a mistake. You can cock up your travel plans, you can cock up some work that you're going to be doing. It just means that you've messed it up. It was on board Voyager of the Seas that a man called Mario fell in love with cruising. He is nicknamed Super Mario, and he has spent the last 20 years living on cruise ships. Minus a little bit of time when the industry did shut down, he says he aims to spend only 15 days on land per year, and that he has completely lost his land legs. He lives now full-time at sea. Royal Caribbean decided to make their central street on Voyager of the Seas a similar height and a similar length. 9% of all of the cabins on this ship are inside this area, looking down into the central street. Unlike the Cilia Symphony, there weren't any skylights on the top because there are other decks above this area, but they do have mood lighting here that simulates daytime or nighttime. Royal Caribbean still has Voyager of the Seas. You can still book a cruise on her right now, and she's been with Royal Caribbean for 23 years, which I think says a lot about the success of this ship. I've not personally cruised on Voyager of the Seas, but I did recently take a trip on the Cilia Symphony ferry. To find out what it's like cruising on board and how it's different to a cruise on a cruise ship, watch this video next.